A husband abandoned his wife and newborn twins in a freezing barn in Montana. Temperature, -18 degrees Celsius. No heat. No food. No help. She survived 4 days with premature babies weighing just 4 pounds each. That barn that almost killed them is now a shelter that has saved more than 15,000 families. $25 million foundation. Comment your country now and subscribe because this true story of Sarah Morrison will leave you breathless. Montana. The temperature outside the barn was -18 degrees Celsius when Thomas Morrison walked away from his wife and newborn twin daughters without looking back. Sarah Morrison, barely 48 hours postpartum, sat on the cold concrete floor of the abandoned dairy barn, a baby in each arm, watching through the gaps in the weathered wooden walls as her husband's truck disappeared down the snow-covered gravel road. It was February in rural Montana, the kind of bone-deep cold that killed people. And Thomas had just left them here, his wife who'd given birth 2 days ago in a hospital, and their 2 infant daughters, born 6 weeks premature at just 4 pounds each. The barn was located on his family's old property, 15 miles outside of Great Falls. The property had been abandoned for years after Thomas's parents died and the dairy operation shut down. No heat. No running water. No electricity. Just empty stalls, rotting hay, and the skeletal remains of a once working farm. Sarah had known their marriage was in trouble. Thomas had been drinking more, staying out late, becoming increasingly angry and volatile. The pregnancy had been unplanned, she'd been on birth control, but nothing is foolproof. When she'd told him they were having twins, he'd gone silent for a full minute before walking out of the room. But she'd never imagined this. 2 hours earlier, Sarah had been released from the hospital that morning against medical advice. The twins, Emma and Lily, were born premature but stable enough to go home. The hospital social worker had concerns about their home situation, but Thomas had been charming during visits, presenting himself as an excited, supportive father. The lie was masterful. On the drive from the hospital, Thomas had been silent. Sarah, exhausted from labor and running on no sleep, had dozed off in the passenger seat, the twins in their car seats in the back. When she woke, they weren't heading home to their small rental house in town. They were driving on a rural road she didn't recognize. "Thomas? Where are we going?" "Taking a detour," he'd said, his voice flat. "The babies need to be in a warm house. They're premature. They need their mother to shut up." Sarah had recoiled at the venom in his voice. This wasn't the man she'd married 5 years ago. This wasn't even the increasingly difficult man he'd become over the past year. This was someone else entirely. When they'd pulled up to the old barn, Sarah's confusion turned to dread. "What are we doing here?" Thomas had gotten out without answering, opened the back door, and pulled out the diaper bag and a small duffel bag of Sarah's clothes from the hospital. "Thomas, what's happening?" "I can't do this," he'd said, dropping the bags in the snow. "I never wanted this. Never wanted kids. Never wanted this life. You did this. You trapped me." "Thomas, I didn't. We talked about. You accidentally got pregnant. With twins. Do you think I'm stupid? You did this on purpose to lock me down." "That's not true. I was on birth control." "I don't care. I'm done. You wanted these babies so badly? They're yours. Figure it out." Sarah had struggled out of the passenger seat, her body still recovering from the cesarean section she'd had 48 hours ago. "Thomas, please. It's freezing. The babies can't survive out here. This is insane. Someone will find you. The property owner checks on this place sometimes. You'll be fine for a day or two. He'd opened the barn's large sliding door, grabbed the bags, and tossed them inside onto the concrete floor. Get the babies, he'd commanded. Thomas, no. Please. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Don't do this. Get the babies. Shaking, crying, Sarah had unbuckled Emma and Lily from their car seats, holding their tiny bodies close to her chest. They were so small, so fragile. Born at just 34 weeks, they needed specialized care, temperature control, frequent feeding. Thomas had physically guided Sarah into the barn, his hand rough on her shoulder. There's some old blankets in the loft. Figure it out. And then he'd left. Just walked to his truck, got in, and drove away. Sarah had stood there in shock for a full minute before the cold snapped her into action. Now, sitting on the concrete floor with a baby in each arm, Sarah assessed her situation with the clarity that comes from absolute desperation. The barn was massive, built to house dozens of dairy cows. It was now empty except for some broken equipment, rotting straw, and debris. The walls had gaps where the wood had warped and split. Wind whistled through those gaps, bringing with it the brutal Montana winter cold. Sarah's phone was in her pocket. She checked it with one hand while holding both babies against her chest with the other. No signal. Of course not. They were in the middle of nowhere. She inventoried what Thomas had left her. The diaper bag with maybe a dozen diapers, 2 bottles, and a small container of formula, the duffel bag with a change of clothes for her, some toiletries, her phone, useless without signal, her wallet with $47 in cash and credit cards, the clothes she was wearing, yoga pants, a hospital-issued top, a thin cardigan, the blankets the babies were wrapped in from the hospital. That was it. No food for her. No water. No heat source. No survival supplies. And 2 newborn babies who needed to be kept warm, fed every 2 to 3 hours, and protected from the elements. Sarah was a teacher, elementary school, 3rd grade. She had no wilderness survival training. No medical expertise beyond basic first aid. She'd never been camping in her life. But she was a mother. And mothers don't give up. The first priority was warmth. The baby's body temperature regulation wasn't fully developed, especially being premature. Hypothermia could kill them in hours. Sarah struggled to stand, her cesarean incision screamed in protest, and looked around the barn. In the loft above, she could see old hay bales and what looked like blankets or tarps. She needed to get up there. But climbing a ladder while holding 2 newborns and recovering from major abdominal surgery seemed impossible. Sarah made a decision. She laid the babies down on her duffel bag on the ground, tucking them together for warmth, and climbed the ladder as quickly as her injured body would allow. In the loft, she found several old horse blankets, dirty but intact, tarp, hay bales, an old metal milk can, some rotted wooden crates, agricultural tools too rusted to be useful. Sarah grabbed everything she could carry and threw it down to the ground level. Then she carefully descended. Working quickly, she created a makeshift nest in the most protected corner of the barn, away from the largest gaps in the walls, sheltered by some old equipment. She laid down the tarp as a barrier against the concrete, piled hay on top of it for insulation, then arranged the blankets to create a warm pocket. She placed Emma and Lily in the center, then climbed in herself, wrapping the blankets around all 3 of them. Body heat. It was their best chance. The babies were crying, weak, mewling sounds that broke Sarah's heart. They were hungry, cold, confused. Sarah prepared bottles with shaking hands, using the formula from the diaper bag mixed with what? She had no water. Think, Sarah. Think. Snow. There was snow outside. She could melt it. Sarah bundled the babies in blankets and laid them in the warm nest she'd created. Then she grabbed the metal milk can, went outside into the bitter cold, and filled it with clean snow from a drift against the barn wall. Back inside, she held the can against her body, trying to warm it enough to melt the snow into water. It was painfully slow, but eventually she had enough water to mix formula. She fed Emma first, then Lily, cradling each tiny body against her chest. They were so small. Emma was 4 pounds 2 ounces at birth. Lily was 3 pounds 15 ounces. They looked impossibly fragile in Sarah's arms. "We're going to be okay," Sarah whispered to them. "Mama's going to keep you safe. I promise. Someone will come. Someone will find us." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Thomas had said the property owner checked on the place, sometimes. That could mean weekly, monthly, rarely. How long could they survive out here? That first night was the longest of Sarah's life. The temperature dropped even further after sunset. Sarah could see her breath inside the barn. She wrapped herself and the babies in every blanket they had, using her own body heat to keep them warm. She couldn't sleep. Every time she started to drift off, one of the babies would cry, needing to be fed or changed. Sarah's cesarean incision throbbed with every movement. Her body was exhausted, still recovering from the trauma of premature birth. But worse than the physical pain was the emotional devastation. Thomas had left them to die. There was no other way to frame it. He'd abandoned his wife and newborn daughters in a freezing barn in the middle of winter. The man she'd loved. The man she'd married. The father of her children. He'd just walked away. Sarah allowed herself 5 minutes of crying, silent tears so she wouldn't upset the babies. Then she stopped. Crying wouldn't help. Action would. By morning, Sarah had developed a routine. Feed the babies. Change them. Hold them against her body for warmth. Check the barn for anything useful. Melt snow for water. Conserve the limited formula. Stay in the warm nest as much as possible. Her phone battery was at 60%. She turned it off to conserve power, checking it only twice a day to see if there was signal. Nothing. She did the math. She had maybe enough formula for 2 days if she stretched it. After that, she'd have to find another solution. She was producing breast milk, but not enough for 2 premature babies. The stress and her own poor nutrition were affecting her supply. 2 days. That's how long they had before the situation became critical. Sarah looked at her sleeping daughters, Emma and Lily, named after her grandmothers. They were so beautiful. Tiny but perfect. They deserved to grow up. To have lives. To be loved. "I won't let you die here," Sarah whispered. "I don't know how, but I won't let that happen." What Sarah didn't know yet, couldn't know, was that this barn held something extraordinary. Not hidden treasure or secret supplies, but something that would change everything. And what she would create in this barn over the coming days would become a story that inspired millions. But that was still ahead. For now, she was just a mother fighting to keep her babies alive in a freezing barn, abandoned by the man who should have protected them. And somewhere in Great Falls, Thomas Morrison was drinking at a bar, telling himself he'd made the right choice. He had no idea what he'd set in motion. Day 2 in the barn began with frost coating the inside of the walls. Sarah woke, if you could call the fitful, interrupted hours of unconsciousness sleep, to find Emma's lips had a slight blue tinge. Panic shot through her. Hypothermia. The baby was getting too cold. Sarah immediately stripped off her cardigan and wrapped it around Emma, then tucked both babies inside her own shirt against her bare skin. Skin-to-skin contact. The nurses at the hospital had emphasized how important it was for premature babies. She sat there for 2 hours, shivering, her own body temperature dropping as she used her warmth to heat her daughters. But Emma's color improved. Lily stayed pink and warm. When both babies were sleeping peacefully, Sarah allowed herself to move. Her cesarean incision was infected. She could tell. The pain had intensified, and when she checked under her hospital-issued bandage, the area was red and warm to touch. She had no antibiotics. No way to properly clean it. Just the small travel-sized hand sanitizer in her diaper bag. She did what she could, cleaned the area with melted snow and hand sanitizer, rewrapped it with the cleanest cloth she could find, and tried not to think about sepsis. The formula was running dangerously low. Maybe 6 bottles worth left. At the rate the babies were eating, that was less than a day's supply. Sarah needed a plan. She decided to explore the barn more thoroughly. Maybe there was something useful she'd missed in the dark and panic of the first night. She bundled the babies in the nest, making sure they were warm and safe, then began a systematic search of the barn. The ground level was mostly empty. Broken equipment. Rotting straw. Nothing useful. But there was a door at the far end she hadn't noticed before. A door leading to what looked like it had been an office or storage room. Sarah tried the handle. Locked. She found a rusted piece of metal, part of an old tool, and used it to pry at the lock. After several minutes of effort that left her sweating despite the cold, the lock broke. The door swung open. Inside was a small room, relatively intact. And on the shelves against the wall, Sarah found canned goods. Lots of them. Beans, soup, vegetables. The cans were dusty and old, but canned food lasted for years if properly stored. A first aid kit, mostly used, but there were bandages, antibiotic ointment, pain relievers, bottles of water, frozen solid, but she could thaw them. A camping stove and propane canister matches, heavy winter coat work gloves, a wool blanket. Sarah nearly cried with relief. Someone, probably whoever owned the property, had left emergency supplies here. Maybe for workers who checked on the property. Maybe for hunters who used the barn. It didn't matter why. It mattered that they existed. She carried everything back to their nest. The camping stove was a game changer. She could heat the frozen water bottles. She could warm formula to the right temperature instead of giving the babies room temperature bottles. She could even heat some of the canned soup for herself. She'd eaten nothing in 2 days and was starting to feel weak and dizzy. For the first time since Thomas had left them, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Maybe they could survive this. Maybe they could last until someone came. Using the camping stove, Sarah heated water, made bottles for the babies, and opened a can of soup for herself. The warm food was like a miracle. She could feel strength returning to her body. She used the antibiotic ointment on her surgical incision, hoping it would help fight the infection. She took the pain relievers, which dulled the constant ache. She put on the winter coat. It was massive, clearly meant for a large man, but it was warm. So warm. And she used the wool blanket to add another layer to their nest. That night, they were warmer than they'd been since arriving at the barn. The babies slept for longer stretches. Sarah actually got 3 consecutive hours of sleep. But when she woke on day 3, reality set back in. The formula was completely gone. She'd used the last of it for the morning feeding. From now on, the babies would have to rely entirely on breast milk. But Sarah's supply was inadequate. The stress, poor nutrition, and her own body's struggle to recover from surgery meant she wasn't producing enough milk for one baby, let alone 2. She'd have to supplement somehow. Sarah remembered something from a parenting book she'd read during pregnancy. Before formula existed, mothers sometimes used goat's milk or diluted cow's milk for babies. It wasn't ideal. Modern formula was specifically designed for infant nutrition, but in survival situations, it had worked. She had canned evaporated milk in the supplies. If she diluted it with water and added a tiny bit of sugar, she'd found some packets in the first aid kit, she might be able to create a makeshift formula. It was risky. The baby's digestive systems were delicate, especially being premature. But what choice did she have? Sarah mixed a small batch, tested it herself to make sure it wasn't too sweet or too thick, and gave it to Emma. Emma drank it. No immediate adverse reaction. Sarah waited 30 minutes. Emma seemed fine. Maybe a little gassier than usual, but fine. She gave some to Lily. Same result. Relief flooded through Sarah. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep them alive. On day 4, Sarah heard a sound that made her freeze. A vehicle. Coming up the road toward the barn. Her heart leaped. Rescue. She grabbed the babies, wrapped them in blankets, and ran to the barn door. Her cesarean incision screamed in protest, but she didn't care. A truck was pulling up. Not Thomas's truck. A different one. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, maybe 60 years old, wearing a heavy winter coat and work boots. "Hello," he called out, clearly surprised to see someone. "This is private property." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Sarah standing there with 2 babies, looking like she'd been through hell. "Please," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "Please help us. My husband left us here. We've been here for 4 days. The babies, they're premature. They need medical attention. Please." The man's expression shifted from confusion to alarm to determination in seconds. "Get in the truck. Now. I'll take you to the hospital. Emergency room, Great Falls Medical Center." The emergency room doctors were horrified when they examined Sarah and the twins. Emma and Lily were dehydrated, slightly hypothermic, and had lost dangerous amounts of weight. Normal for newborns to lose some weight, but they'd lost too much. They needed 4 fluids and specialized care immediately. Sarah had a severe infection from her cesarean incision, was dehydrated and malnourished, and was suffering from exhaustion and exposure. All 3 were admitted to the hospital. While Sarah was being treated, she gave a statement to the police. The officer taking the report, Detective Maria Santos, looked increasingly angry as Sarah told the story. "Your husband abandoned you and your newborn twins in an unheated barn in February. You were there for 4 days with minimal supplies. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you were only 48 hours postpartum when he left you there?" "Yes." "Do you know where your husband is now?" "No. He took his truck and left. I haven't heard from him." Detective Santos made notes. "Mrs. Morrison, what your husband did is criminal. Child endangerment. Attempted murder, possibly. We're going to find him and arrest him. Sarah nodded numbly. She was too exhausted to feel anything. Anger would come later. Right now she just felt relief that her babies were safe. The man who'd found them, his name was George Patterson, and he owned the property where the barn stood, visited Sarah in the hospital the next day. I check on that barn every couple of weeks, he explained. Make sure nobody's using it for drugs or vandalism. I keep those emergency supplies there for hunters who have permission to use my land. Never thought I'd find someone actually needing them to survive. You saved our lives, Sarah said. If you hadn't come when you did. Don't think about that. You're safe now. Your babies are safe. Mr. Patterson, I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to let me use your barn? George looked confused. Use it for what? I have an idea. Something I want to create. Something meaningful. I'll explain when I'm thinking more clearly. But would you consider it? George studied her for a long moment. Lady, you survived 4 days in a freezing barn with 2 newborn babies. You created makeshift formula and kept them alive. If you want to use that barn for something, I'm listening. 3 days later, Thomas Morrison was arrested at a motel in Billings, Montana, where he'd been staying since abandoning his family. The charges were severe: 3 counts of child endangerment, attempted murder, 2 counts for the babies, 1 for Sarah given her medical condition, reckless endangerment, and domestic violence. Bail was set at $500,000. Thomas couldn't make it. He remained in custody. His public defender tried to argue that Thomas had been experiencing a mental health crisis, that he'd panicked, that he'd thought Sarah would be found quickly. No one believed him. The evidence was too damning. He'd left them with minimal supplies in a known abandoned building in sub-zero temperatures. He'd waited 4 days before being found. If he'd thought they'd be quickly rescued, he would have called someone himself. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Diana Chen, laid out the case in brutal detail at the preliminary hearing. The defendant abandoned his wife and newborn twins in an unheated barn in February. The temperature averaged -15 degrees Celsius during those 4 days. The babies were premature and required specialized care. The wife was recovering from major surgery. The defendant left them with approximately 1 day's worth of supplies and no way to call for help. If not for the property owner's routine check of the barn, something that happens every 2 to 3 weeks, Mrs. Morrison and her daughters would likely be dead. This was attempted murder. Premeditated and cruel. The judge ordered Thomas held without bail pending trial. While Thomas sat in jail, Sarah was recovering in the hospital and planning something extraordinary. She'd realized something during those 4 days in the barn. She'd learned that she was stronger than she'd ever known. That maternal instinct was a powerful survival tool. That desperation could drive innovation. But she'd also realized something else. She wasn't the only mother in crisis. She wasn't the only woman abandoned by a partner. She wasn't the only family struggling in impossible circumstances. And she wanted to help. The idea started small. But over the following weeks, as Sarah recovered and the twins grew stronger, it grew into something much bigger. Something that would transform that barn from a place of near death into a place of hope. Something that would help thousands of families. But first, Sarah had to heal. Had to get strong. Had to prepare. 6 weeks after the rescue, Sarah stood in front of the barn with George Patterson, Emma and Lily bundled in a double stroller beside her. The babies had gained weight. Both were now over 6 pounds and thriving. Sarah's infection had cleared, and though she still had pain from the cesarean, she was healing. But more than her body had healed. Her sense of purpose had crystallized. "So explain to me again what you want to do with this barn," George said, his breath visible in the still cold Montana air. Sarah took a deep breath. "I want to turn it into a crisis shelter, specifically for mothers and children in emergency situations. Women fleeing domestic violence. Mothers who've been abandoned. Families who need immediate help and have nowhere else to go." George listened carefully. "During those 4 days we were trapped here, I kept thinking, how many other women are in situations like this? Maybe not literally abandoned in a barn, but abandoned in other ways. Left with children and no resources. Trapped in dangerous relationships. Desperate with nowhere to turn. The existing shelters in Great Falls are always full. There's a 6-week waiting list at the main domestic violence shelter. 6 weeks. Women don't have 6 weeks when they're fleeing abuse. They need help now." Sarah gestured to the barn. "This place almost killed us. But it also showed me what's possible. With those emergency supplies you'd left, I kept my babies alive. I created makeshift formula. I built a warm nest. I survived. What if we transformed this barn into a place where other mothers could survive? Not just survive, actually get back on their feet. A place with real resources, support, safety." George was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What exactly would you need?" Sarah pulled out a notebook she'd been working in during her hospital recovery. She'd thought through every detail. "We'd need to renovate the barn completely. Insulation, heating, electricity, running water, bathroom facilities. Convert it into small private rooms, maybe 6 to 8 of them, where mothers and children could stay safely. Each room with beds, basic furniture, warmth. We'd need a common kitchen where families could prepare meals. A playroom for children. A small office space for case managers and counselors. Security features, cameras, good locks, maybe a buzzer system. Most importantly, we'd need it to be warm, safe, dignified. Not just a place to sleep, but a place where mothers could breathe, plan, rebuild." George nodded slowly. "That's ambitious. And expensive. I know. But I've been researching grants for this kind of project. Federal emergency shelter funding. State domestic violence prevention money. Private foundation grants. And I'm going to fundraise. Tell our story. People respond to stories." "Your story," George said quietly. "You're going to tell people what happened to you." "Yes. Because if our suffering can prevent other families from suffering, then it means something. If this barn can go from being a place where we almost died to a place where families are saved, that's transformation. That's redemption." George looked at the barn, then at Sarah, then at the sleeping twins. "Okay," he said. "I'll donate the barn and the surrounding acre of land. Free and clear. You can do whatever you need to make this happen." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Patterson." "George. Call me George. And don't thank me yet. You've got a hell of a lot of work ahead of you." "I know. But I'm not afraid of work. I'm afraid of sitting still while other mothers and children suffer." The media campaign. Sarah knew that to make this project happen, She needed funding. And to get funding, she needed to tell her story publicly. It was terrifying. Going public meant reliving the trauma. It meant people knowing the most vulnerable, desperate moments of her life. It meant judgment and scrutiny. But it also meant help for families who desperately needed it. Sarah reached out to a local news station. They jumped at the story. Mother and newborn twins abandoned in freezing barn. How they survived and what they're building now. The segment aired on a Friday evening. Sarah sat on camera, Emma and Lily in her arms, and told the truth. She explained how Thomas had abandoned them. The 4 days of survival. The makeshift formula. The desperate attempt to keep premature babies warm in sub-zero temperatures. The miracle of George Patterson's emergency supplies and timely arrival. And then she explained her vision for the barn. No mother should ever be left without options. No child should suffer because their family is in crisis. I want to transform the place where my daughters and I almost died into a place where families can find safety, support, and hope. A place where mothers in crisis can catch their breath and start rebuilding. The response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the station's website had received over 10,000 messages of support. People wanted to donate. Contractors offered their services at cost or free. Architects volunteered to design the renovation. Therapists and case managers offered to staff the facility. A GoFundMe campaign Sarah set up raised $50,000 in the first week. A regional foundation that focused on domestic violence prevention contacted her about a major grant. A national building supply company offered to donate all the materials for the renovation. Within a month, Sarah had $200,000 in committed funding and resources. The barn project was going to happen. Thomas's trial. While Sarah was building something beautiful from trauma, Thomas was facing justice. His trial began 4 months after the abandonment. The prosecution's case was devastating. They presented hospital records showing Sarah's cesarean delivery and medical condition, the twins' birth records showing they were premature and required specialized care, weather records showing temperatures of -15 to -20 Celsius during the 4 days, photos of the barn showing its condition, unheated. Minimal shelter, Sarah's testimony about the abandonment, George Patterson's testimony about finding, the medical testimony about how close all three had come to dying. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, that Thomas had been experiencing a mental health crisis and wasn't thinking rationally. But the prosecution destroyed that argument by showing Thomas's actions after the abandonment: going to a motel, paying cash, avoiding police, making no attempt to check on his family or call for help. These are not the actions of someone in a mental health crisis, prosecutor Diana Chen argued. These are the actions of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and simply didn't care whether his family lived or died. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge's sentencing was harsh: 25 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 years. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said, her voice ice-cold, "you abandoned your wife and newborn daughters in conditions that should have killed them. That they survived is a testament to Mrs. Morrison's remarkable strength and determination, and sheer luck. You showed no remorse, made no attempt to ensure their safety, and have demonstrated throughout this trial that you feel you were justified in your actions. You deserve every day of this sentence. And I hope you spend those days thinking about the family you tried to destroy and the remarkable things they're accomplishing without you." As Thomas was led away in handcuffs, he looked at Sarah one time. She met his gaze without flinching, Emma and Lily, now 5 months old and healthy, in her arms. "You tried to kill us," her expression said. "Instead, you gave us purpose." The barn transformation. 6 months after rescue. The renovation of the barn was a community effort. Local contractors donated labor. Volunteers came on weekends to help with painting and finishing work. Montana State University's architecture students made it a class project. The transformation was remarkable. The old dairy barn became a warm, secure crisis shelter with 8 private rooms, each with beds, furniture, and space for a mother and up to 3 children, a commercial kitchen where families could prepare meals together, a children's playroom with toys, books, and games, a community room for group meetings and activities, offices for case managers, therapists, and administrative staff, laundry facilities, full bathrooms with showers, industrial heating and insulation, security cameras, and controlled access, a small outdoor play area for children. The shelter was designed to feel like a home, not an institution. Warm colors on the walls. Comfortable furniture. Pictures and decorations. A place where traumatized families could feel safe and dignified. Sarah named it Emma and Lily's Place, after her daughters, and in honor of all children affected by family crisis. The operating model was simple. Mothers and children in emergency situations could stay for up to 90 days while working with case managers to secure permanent housing, employment, childcare, and any other support needed. No cost to families. No waiting list for true emergencies. Services included safe housing, case management, job training and placement assistance, child care assistance, legal advocacy for custody, divorce, restraining orders, therapy and counseling, children's programs, life skills workshops, connection to long-term resources. The shelter opened in August, 8 months after Sarah and her twins had been abandoned there. The first family arrived that same day, a mother fleeing domestic violence with her 2 young sons. She'd been turned away from 2 other shelters because they were full. Sarah showed her to a private room, warm and safe. The woman broke down crying. "I didn't think we had anywhere to go. I thought we'd have to go back. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're safe now," Sarah said. "And we're going to help you build a new life." 1-year anniversary. Emma and Lily's Place celebrated its 1-year anniversary with remarkable success. Served 47 families, 83 women and children total. 89% of families successfully transitioned to permanent housing. 0 families returned to abusive situations. Partnerships with employers resulted in job placement for 34 mothers. Therapy services provided to all residents. Children's program helped 52 kids cope with trauma. The shelter became a model studied by domestic violence organizations across the country. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences, to consult with other shelters, to share the story of transformation. But she always came back to the same message: our worst moments can become our greatest purpose. That barn almost killed us. Now it's saving lives. The twins' first birthday. Emma and Lily turned 1-year-old surrounded by love. They were healthy, happy, hitting all their developmental milestones. They had no memory of those 4 desperate days in the freezing barn. Sarah threw them a small party at the shelter. The staff attended. Some of the families currently staying there joined in. George Patterson was there, now serving on the shelter's board of directors. As Sarah watched her daughters smash birthday cake with their tiny hands, she thought about that terrifying night when she'd sat on a freezing concrete floor, a baby in each arm, wondering if they'd survive until morning. They'd not only survived, they'd thrived. And the place that had almost been their grave had become a sanctuary for dozens of other families. Thomas had tried to destroy them. Instead, he'd revealed Sarah's strength and given her a mission that would help thousands. That was the ultimate victory. Emma and Lily's place had outgrown its original capacity. The 8 rooms were constantly full, and Sarah had a waiting list for the first time, not the months-long waits of other shelters, but still, families needing help immediately. Sarah sat in her small office at the shelter, reviewing the numbers from their 3rd year. 156 families served, over 300 women and children, 92% successful transition to permanent housing partnerships with 23 local employers. Therapy services expanded to include specialized trauma counseling for children. Average stay 52 days. Families were rebuilding faster with comprehensive support. Operating budget $450,000 annually, from grants, donations, and some state funding. The shelter had become an essential part of Great Falls's social safety net. Police referred families there. Hospitals sent mothers in crisis. Other shelters called when they were full. But Sarah's vision had expanded. She didn't just want to run one shelter anymore. She wanted to create a model that could be replicated nationwide. She'd been documenting everything: best practices, challenges, solutions, budget models, partnership strategies. She'd created a comprehensive guide for starting a crisis shelter for mothers and children. And she was ready to share it. Sarah was invited to testify before the Montana State Legislature about domestic violence resources and family crisis support. She stood before the committee, now 33 years old, and told her story. But she didn't just talk about the abandonment anymore. She talked about what came after. 3 years ago, my husband left me and our newborn twins in a freezing barn to die. We survived because of luck, determination, and one man's emergency supplies. But I realized during those 4 days that I wasn't the only mother in crisis. I wasn't the only family abandoned by systems that should protect them. Emma and Lily's place has served over 300 women and children in 3 years. We've had a 92% success rate in helping families transition to stable, permanent housing. We've prevented children from entering foster care. We've helped mothers escape violent situations. We've saved lives. But we're one shelter serving one community. Montana needs more resources like this. Every county should have immediate access crisis housing for families. No waiting lists. No barriers. Just immediate safety and comprehensive support. Sarah presented her proposal: state funding to replicate the Emma and Lily's Place model in 5 additional Montana communities over the next 3 years. Total cost, $2.5 million. That sounds like a lot of money, Sarah acknowledged. But consider what we save: emergency room visits for abuse-related injuries, foster care costs when families are separated, law enforcement resources responding to domestic violence calls, court costs, long-term social services for traumatized children. Prevention and intervention are cheaper than crisis response. And more importantly, they work. The committee listened intently. Several members asked questions. Sarah answered each one with data, examples, and the kind of practical wisdom that comes from actually running a shelter, not just theorizing about it. 2 months later, the Montana legislature approved $3 million in funding for family crisis shelters based on the Emma and Lily's Place model. 5 new shelters would be built across Montana over the next 4 years. Sarah was asked to consult on all of them. National attention. A documentary filmmaker had followed Sarah's story for 2 years, creating a film about the transformation of the barn and the families it had helped. The documentary, titled From Freezing to Hope, The Emma and Lily's Place Story, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and won the Audience Award for Documentary. It told Sarah's story, but it also told the stories of 5 families who had stayed at the shelter. Maria, who fled with her 3 children from a husband who had hospitalized her twice. With help from the shelter, she got a restraining order, secured a job as a medical assistant, and moved into her own apartment. Jennifer, a single mother whose house burned down and had nowhere to go. The shelter gave her time to navigate insurance, find new housing, and stabilize her children. Aisha, who had been abandoned by her partner when their son was diagnosed with autism. The shelter connected her with disability services, job training, and ultimately a career in social work. Rebecca, escaping a cult-like religious group that had isolated her family. The shelter provided safety while she navigated the complex process of rebuilding a life outside the group. Lisa, a military veteran with PTSD whose symptoms had escalated after her husband left. The shelter connected her with VA services, mental health treatment, and job placement. Each story was unique. But they all shared one thing: Emma and Lily's place had been the turning point. The safe harbor that allowed them to catch their breath and rebuild. The documentary was picked up by Netflix and released nationally. Within weeks, Sarah was receiving hundreds of messages from people across the country. Other domestic violence shelters wanting to learn from her model mothers who had been in similar crisis situations, thanking her for speaking up, donors wanting to support expansion, filmmakers, journalists, and authors wanting to share the story further. Most impactfully, property owners in other states offering to donate buildings that could be converted into similar shelters. The movement was spreading. Emma and Lily, age 3. The twins had no memory of those 4 days in the barn. To them, the shelter was just Mama's work, a place with lots of other kids to play with, nice ladies who worked there, and sometimes new families who needed help. Sarah was careful about how much she shared with them. They knew Daddy had made bad choices and had to go away. They knew they lived in the barn for a little while when they were babies. But Sarah didn't burden them with the full truth yet. That would come when they were older. For now, Emma and Lily were happy, healthy 3-year-olds. Emma was bold and adventurous, always climbing and exploring. Lily was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a wicked sense of humor. They attended a local preschool and were thriving. Sarah made sure their lives were as normal as possible, despite the unusual circumstances of their birth and the public nature of their story. But she also made sure they understood, in age-appropriate ways, the value of helping others. "Why do those families stay at your work, Mama?" Emma had asked once. "Because sometimes people need help and a safe place to stay while they figure things out," Sarah had explained. "And we help them because that's what people do, we take care of each other." "Like you took care of us in the barn?" Lily had said. Sarah had been surprised. "What do you know about the barn, sweetie?" "George told us. He said you were very brave and kept us safe." Sarah had hugged both girls. "Yes, like that. Sometimes we have to be brave and help each other. That's the most important thing." Thomas's prison letters. Sarah had received 3 letters from Thomas over the 3 years since his imprisonment. She hadn't opened the first 2, but the third one she did. "Sarah, I know I have no right to contact you. I know apologies are meaningless after what I did. But I need you to know, I understand now what I took from you. What I almost took from Emma and Lily. Prison has given me a lot of time to think. To get sober. To face what kind of person I became. I was angry, scared, selfish. I blamed you for my own failures. I convinced myself you'd trapped me when the truth is I was just a coward who couldn't handle responsibility. I've been following the news about Emma and Lily's place. I saw the documentary. They showed it here as part of a rehabilitation program. What you've built is extraordinary. You took the worst thing I ever did and turned it into something that saves lives. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know, I'm glad you survived. I'm glad the girls are thriving. And I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry, for everything. I'll be eligible for parole in 15 years. I won't contact you or the girls when I'm released. You've built a life without me. You should keep it that way. Thomas. Sarah read the letter twice, then filed it away with the others. She felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just a distant acknowledgement that this was a man she used to know who had made terrible choices. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Thomas was her past. The shelter and her daughters were her future. 5 years after the abandonment, Emma and Lily's place had grown into something bigger than Sarah had ever imagined. The original shelter in Great Falls was now part of a network of 7 shelters across Montana, all following the same model. Together, they had served over 1,000 families in 5 years. Sarah had written a book, Survival and Sanctuary: How One Barn Became a Movement. It combined her personal story with practical guidance for starting crisis shelters and supporting families in trauma. The book became a bestseller and was now required reading in several social work programs. Sarah had been invited to the White House to discuss family crisis intervention strategies. She'd consulted with domestic violence organizations in 40 states. She'd helped launch similar shelters in Wyoming, Idaho, and North Dakota. The Emma and Lily's place model was being replicated nationwide. But Sarah never forgot where it started. In a freezing barn, with 2 newborn babies, fighting to survive. Every time she walked into the warm, safe shelter that barn had become, she remembered those 4 desperate days. And she used that memory as fuel to keep pushing forward, to help more families, to build more shelters. Because if her suffering had meaning, if those 4 days of hell had led to thousands of families finding safety, then it was worth it. Sarah stood at the barn with Emma and Lily, now 10 years old, on the anniversary of the day they'd been abandoned there. It had become a tradition. Every year on this date, Sarah brought the girls to the shelter to remind them where they came from and what they'd built. "This is where it happened?" Emma asked, looking at the warm, welcoming building that bore her name. "Yes. Right here. 10 years ago today, your father left us in this barn. It was freezing cold. We had almost nothing. I thought we might die." "But you didn't," Lily said softly. "No. We didn't. Because I refused to give up. And because Mr. Patterson came when we needed him. And because I realized that our survival had to mean something." The girls had known the full story for 2 years now. Sarah had told them on their 8th birthday, believing they were old enough to understand. They'd reacted differently. Emma had been angry at Thomas, angry at the situation, angry that it had happened at all. Lily had been sad, crying for the scared version of their mother and their infant selves. But both had eventually come to the same conclusion. It was part of their story, and that story had helped thousands of people. "How many families now, Mama?" Emma asked. Across all our shelters? We've helped over 3,000 families in 10 years. That's more than 6,000 women and children who found safety when they needed it most. Sarah guided them inside the shelter. The current residents knew who they were, the twins whose names were on the building, the daughters of the woman who'd started it all. A mother named Rachel approached with her 2 young daughters. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to thank you. We've been here for 3 weeks, and it's the first time in 2 years I felt safe. Your staff helped me get a restraining order, find a job, and we're moving into our own apartment next week." Sarah smiled. "That's wonderful, Rachel. You did the hard work. We just provided support. It's more than that. You gave us hope. You showed us that survival is possible, that we can rebuild." After Rachel walked away, Lily said quietly, "That's why you do this, isn't it? So other moms don't have to be as scared as you were." "Yes, sweetie. Exactly." The Emma and Lily Foundation. The shelter had evolved into something bigger. The Emma and Lily Foundation, a national organization focused on family crisis intervention and support. The foundation operated 23 crisis shelters in 12 states, a national hotline for mothers in emergency situations, job training and placement programs, legal advocacy services, children's trauma therapy programs, a consulting service helping other organizations build similar programs. Annual operating budget, $12 million, raised through grants, donations, and some government funding. Families served over 10 years, 200 plus, over 7,000 individuals including children. Success rate, 91% of families transitioned to stable housing and situations. Sarah had become a national advocate for family crisis resources, testifying before Congress multiple times, consulting with federal agencies, and speaking at conferences worldwide. But she always remained connected to the original shelter. She still worked there 2 days a week, meeting with families, helping with case management, staying grounded in the actual work. "The moment I lose touch with the families we serve is the moment this becomes about ego instead of mission," she often said. Thomas's parole hearing. After serving 10 years, Thomas became eligible for parole. Sarah received a notification asking if she wanted to provide a statement. She declined. She had nothing to say to him or about him. Thomas was granted parole on his second hearing, after 12 years in prison. He was released with strict conditions: no contact with Sarah or the twins, mandatory therapy, regular check-ins with his parole officer. He moved to a different state, Oregon, got a job in construction, and lived quietly. He never tried to contact his family. He knew he had no right. But he sent annual anonymous donations to the Emma and Lily Foundation. $5,000 each year, every year, from an account that couldn't be traced back to him. The foundation accepted the donations. Money was money, and it helped families. Sarah suspected they were from Thomas but never confirmed it. It didn't matter. The twins' decision. When Emma and Lily turned 16, they received a letter from Thomas through the legal system. He'd written it carefully, knowing it might be the only contact they ever had. "Emma and Lily, you don't know me except as the person who hurt you and your mother. That's accurate. I don't deserve to be known as anything else. I'm writing to say, I don't expect a relationship with you. I don't deserve one. Your mother is an extraordinary woman who gave you everything I failed to provide. You owe me nothing. But if you ever want to meet, to ask questions, to tell me how angry you are, I'll be here. Not because I deserve that opportunity, but because you deserve the chance if you need it. Just know, I'm sorry. And I'm proud of who you're becoming, even though I had no part in it. Thomas Morrison. The girls showed the letter to Sarah. What should we do? What do you want to do? Emma spoke first. I don't want to meet him. Not now. Maybe not ever. He's just a biological fact to me. Not a father. Lily nodded slowly. I'm curious what he's like. But I don't need to meet him. Mom is all the parent we need. That's completely valid, Sarah said. You can change your minds later if you want. Or not. This is your choice, always. They never responded to the letter. Thomas accepted the silence as his answer. 15 years after the abandonment. The Emma and Lily Foundation celebrated 15 years with a gala fundraiser that raised $2 million in one evening. Emma and Lily, now 15 and in high school, attended. They'd become passionate advocates themselves, volunteering at the shelter, speaking at school about domestic violence awareness, even starting a peer support group for teens affected by family crisis. Sarah watched them with pride. They'd taken their story and used it to help others. They'd chosen empathy over anger, action over victimhood. Mama, Emma said during the gala, Lily and I have been talking. We want to work for the foundation when we're older. Maybe run shelters, or do advocacy, or something. We want to continue what you started. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to do that. You can be whatever you want to be. We know, Lily said. But this is what we want. Our story helped thousands of families. We want to keep helping. Sarah hugged both girls. Then we'll make that happen. Together. 20 years after the abandonment. 2 decades after that terrifying February night in the barn, Sarah stood before a crowd of 5,000 people at a national conference on family services. Emma and Lily, now 20 and in college, both studying social work, sat in the front row. 20 years ago, my husband abandoned me and our newborn twins in a freezing barn. He left us to die. We survived because of determination, luck, and one man's kindness. But survival was just the beginning. That barn became a shelter. That shelter became a foundation. That foundation has now helped over 10,000 families across the country find safety, support, and new beginnings. People ask me if I've forgiven my ex-husband. The answer is, I don't think about him enough to forgive or not forgive. He's irrelevant to my life. What matters is what we built from what he tried to destroy. Trauma doesn't define us. How we respond to trauma defines us. We can let it break us, or we can use it as fuel to build something meaningful. That barn almost killed us. Now it saves lives. That's transformation. That's the power of refusing to be a victim and choosing to be a builder instead. The audience erupted in applause. Present day. The Emma and Lily Foundation operates in 30 states. Its budget exceeds $25 million annually. It has helped over 15,000 families. The original barn in Montana is now a national landmark and training center where people from across the country come to learn how to start and run family crisis shelters. Sarah, now 51, serves as the foundation's president. Emma runs the Children's Programs Division. Lily manages the Legal Advocacy Department. Mother and daughters, working together, helping thousands. George Patterson, now 82, still serves on the board of directors. The barn he owned has become his proudest legacy. And somewhere in Oregon, Thomas Morrison lives quietly, knowing that his worst act created something beautiful that will outlive him by generations. Sarah returned to the barn one winter evening, alone. It was February, the same month she'd been abandoned 20 years ago. She walked through the warm, safe building that had once been a place of near death. The rooms where families currently slept in safety. The kitchen where mothers prepared meals for their children. The playroom where traumatized kids learned to be kids again. She walked outside to the spot where she'd sat on that freezing concrete floor, 2 babies in her arms, wondering if they'd survive until morning. We didn't just survive, Sarah thought. We transformed everything. That night of horror became the seed of hope for thousands. You tried to destroy us, Thomas. Instead, you showed us what we were capable of. You revealed our strength. And we used that strength to build something that will help families long after we're gone. Thank you for failing to kill us. Because your failure became our purpose. The barn stood behind her, lights glowing warm against the Montana winter night. Inside, 12 families slept safely. Tomorrow, case managers would help them take another step toward stability. Children would play. Mothers would breathe without fear. All because Sarah had refused to let trauma be the end of the story. She'd made it the beginning.